continuing our romp through kind of a spooky time with the Halloween season in full effect, I want to talk about the vampire bloodlines. Now, I've talked about this in the past. It was one of the very first videos I ever did. I'm actually going to revamp that, break everything down here. So here's how this is going to go. We're going to talk about the ancient city of Lamia, and we're going to talk about the kind of beginning of vampires. And then we're going to talk about each one of these bloodlines in their own separate video. We'll include the Lamian vampires in alongside the kind of history of the vampires here. But I have to take you guys back. We're going to go back in time to a time when ancient Neferata was not filled with bone daddies and skeletons dooting all over the place. It was filled with humans. It was a very successful, a very, growing civilization of basically proto-Egyptians going through the Southlands, into the Badlands, through the southern portions of the empire, really all over the globe. I mean, we talk about the empire and how the empire is so amazing and strong, and the old world is this great world, but for a long time, after really like the reign of the old ones and the lizardmen and the high elves and everything, the Neferkarans were very, very strong as really one of the very first empires of humanity. And of Neferata, there was the city of Lamia. Now, in Lamia was Neferatatem, which is basically who Neferata was before she was a vampire. Now, Neferatatem was a princess of Lamia, and her father eventually rose to become the king of Khemri, and in doing so left her to be the queen of Lamia, to rule over Lamia in his stead. Now, she had a lot of, I guess you could say, progressive thoughts for the cult of the dead. She wanted to become a priestess, and she wanted to be a part of the mortuary cult, and her father said, no, that's not the way things are in Neferata. So Sworon, who becomes a very important character here soon, is an agent of Nagash. He's planted himself into the mortuary cult as basically a catalyst for starting the revolt against Neferata when Nagash comes back to power. So he is basically kind of pulling the strings here, seeing what he can do to really kind of butter up that eventual resurgence of Nagash. And he sees that Neferatatem is really interested in becoming, a member of the mortuary cult. So he starts to give her little pieces of knowledge of Nagash. He saves all these scrolls, the books, and everything of the sort of Nagash, and starts to teach her more and more and more about necromancy. And eventually Neferatatem and Sworon perfect what is the elixir of life, or a corrupted version thus of. There are many different kind of points in the lore here. Is it corrupted by Sworon? Did they just not know the level of mastery of necromancy that Nagash did, thus they corrupted the elixir of life? The original intention of the elixir of life was to grant eternal life without any kind of negative anything. There's also another kind of tale that says that Nagash actually corrupted the recipe, or he messed with the recipe of the elixir of life, hoping someone would replicate it, creating vampirism. Because the elixir of life, the way it actually worked is it stopped the heart of the imbiber, thus making it so that a person could remain youthful and strong, and it was given otherworldly level strength as long as they were consumed more and more blood of the living. So conversely, you have the mother of vampires in Neferata and the father of vampires in Sworon. And there's some mentionings during the end times how Arkan the Black actually had a whole hand in this. And I don't really want to get into that, to be totally honest. A lot of what I'm going off of is the 6th edition lore for the vampire counts. That's where the bloodlines are in full effect. We have the bloodline special abilities for each bloodline. And we have like full-on magical powers for them. A really great fleshing out of things. During the legendary, or the Warhammer Legends book that covers Neferata's whole life, things changed up a lot. During the 7th and 8th editions, Sworon's role changed a whole lot. Like in the 6th edition role, Sworon is killed off. So we're going to kind of segue and seam or kind of thread our way through this as best we can, knowing that there are some retcons that kind of happen from different variables in the lore. If you do notice some of those retcons and you like them a little bit better, please feel free to comment below saying, hey, I know where you approach this, but I liked this retcon and blank. You can mention whatever it was, but I will do my best to kind of try and do the just deserves of each race and everything. So, Neferata has the elixir of life. Now, there's a difference between drinking from the elixir of life and getting what is called the blood kiss. The blood kiss is when I, a vampire, give you, a human, a bit of my blood, turning you into a vampire. This makes for a lesser vampire. Anyone who drank from the elixir of life was really a vampire Primarch, if you want to think of it. They were the very original vampires of each respective bloodline. They're considered a master vampire. Now, in the 6th edition lore, there were 11 of these master vampires, including Neferata, and after the sacking of Lamia, only 7 of them remained. Now, what happened in the greater lore in the Legends book is that just 7. There's only just 7 vampire bloodlines. That kind of became the overall gist of things. So we'll stick with that notion that there are 7 vampire bloodlines. So what happens is Neferata eventually starts to turn more and more and more of her confidants, her brother, individuals over to vampirism. You have Ashoron, her brother, who is eventually it's like the Mask of Masks, and he becomes the leader of the Strigoi bloodline. Abhorash, the guard of the captain of her guard, becomes the leader of the Blood Dragon vampire bloodline, as we all well know that I know. And then we have Waswaron, who becomes the leader of the Nekhark vampire bloodline. So everyone really has a role in everything. The only one who kind of has a very recently fleshed out role is Vashanish, who becomes von Karstein bloodline. Now, sticking with Lamia here, just to kind of cut through the kind of beginning portion of this and going in through the whole history of the city of Lamia, which we've kind of touched on, and I want to save it for Neferata's individual video when we talk about her as a possible legendary lord and what she might look like. We're just going to jump to the end of the city of Lamia. So Neferata has given out the kiss, or either the blood kiss to people or the elixir of life. Created her master vampires, created her pretty much her eternal court of the night. The cult of blood is what it's called. And with the fall of the city of Lamia, all the vampires kind of scatter to the 7 winds. Abhorash goes on his own route. Ashoron creates the Empire Strigos in the city of Morcaine. Waswaron still stays with Nagash and then kind of goes through his whole deal. But Neferata is the only vampire to really kind of separate herself from the greater lore. From the greater kind of turmoil and politics of the old world in a more direct way. She takes over the Silver Pinnacle, and there she kind of recreates the majesty of Lamia in the sense that she recreates the cult of blood, or it is in high effect there, and she cultivates the Lamian vampire bloodline. Now, these vampires are very different from all the other ones. Nekharks are, of course, these magicians, but the Strigoi, von Karstein, and Blood Dragon vampires are a lot more melee-centric, right? They're these really great fighters, either bestial or with a lot of martial prowess. So you have a lot of different kind of roles that those guys play into. But the Lamian vampires are all about kind of subterfuge and political intrigue and using almost like this femme fatale type of approach to things. They use their beauty to kind of infiltrate important portions of either the Bretonnian or the Empire or the Tilian or the Estalian or the Border Princes, infiltrate those courts and influence actually the events of the age. There are so many things that have happened throughout the Warhammer world that a lot of what can be said has happened was actually influenced by Lamian vampires in a lot of ways. So it's a pretty interesting kind of role that they've played as this kind of undercurrent to the entirety of the growth of the old world. How they've kind of said, oh, well, we're going to be the ones, the real kingmakers that decide who lives and dies, while you von Karsteins have your vampire wars, and you Abhorash have your weird honor system, and you Strigoi just kind of eat dead things, and you the Nekhark vampires research and everything. We're going to be the ones that actually are the movers and the shakers. And that's the really interesting kind of role that the Lahmian vampires have played throughout history. They've kind of gone out, each and every one of them, to different courts and influenced them heavily. Like there's one kind of story about how this Tilian kind of merchant comes to the Silver Pinnacle and gets to actually talk to Neferata, but it's only through like these 7 veils, so you really can't see what she looks like, and she kind of remains in the shadows, and she has this beguiling, beautiful voice, and she apparently breeds cats. I know that sounds ridiculous, but just bear with me. And the Tillian merchant leaves with this beautiful black cat with like piercing blue eyes, and as he's kind of traveling back to Tilia, the cat disappears, and in its place is this beautiful, beautiful pale woman. And she never comes out of the caravan during the day, and the guy doesn't ask any questions. He's like, "All right, yeah, okay, we'll take you to Tilia," and she just departs from the caravan when they reach Tilia and joins this order of a monastic order of women, and no one's allowed inside that order. So it's like basically she hands out these people she hands out these cats, which are basically just not transmorgified, but shapeshifted Lamian vampires to go pretty much infiltrate different portions of the world, and in a very subtle kind of crafty way. So this is really awesome, right? We're seeing in Total War Warhammer finally the Bloodlines kind of coming into full effect, and this is really why I chose to do this. I wanted to flesh out what those vampire bloodlines are like, right? We have the Lamian. The Lord's focus is a master infiltrator, cunning and deceptive. No other vampires have infiltrated human society in the way as the Lamian's shadowy sisterhood. And we get that direct representation from lore, where we're talking about this kind of spycraft level vampire cult that just goes about and influences the world, and it's really, really cool. You almost kind of think of like Cold War influence on both the nations of the nations of the world as a whole during the Cold War. So really kind of awesome stuff here. And when you look at the actual rules of the Lamians for Total War Warhammer, it kind of doesn't necessarily echo the tabletop, and that's what I want to talk about here. So the bloodlines in the 6th edition, you chose which bloodline your vampire was a part of: Harstein, Neckarch, Blood Dragon, Strigoi, or Lamia. And each one of these gave innate bonuses. So the Lamians got +2 to initiative, any model in base contact with a vampire, -1 to their leadership, and -1 to the Lamian's leadership as well, because they're not these like amazing duelists. But don't let that -1 to weapon skill fool you here. Vampires in and of themselves have like a base weapon skill stat of like 7, so they're still like leaps and bounds above most other characters. So from that, each and every single one of these bloodlines thus has these powers, right? These actual bloodline powers that then give them certain benefits, and you choose them based off of what kind of vampire you're dealing with. Are you a Lord level vampire, Lord, or just a vampire hero? And you had a point cap. You could only choose either 50 or 100, depending if you were a Lord or a hero, respectively. So with the Lamians, you have seduction, domination, quick blood, innocence lost, transfix, beguile, and each one of these has really thematic rules that pertain to the bloodline. So seduction: how can a mortal resist the lure of a creature who has preyed on warm-blooded males since the dawn of time? And basically the way this rule works in the tabletop is that if your character is in base contact with the Lahmian vampire, it gets all of its attacks are made onto your own faction. So it's pretty cool. You completely seduce and control that character. And there's domination. The eyes of the vampire are 2 deep pits in which a mortal can find his doom. And rather than each one of these is a step down. You'll kind of understand that in a second here. But domination makes it so that if the model is in base contact, they fail their leadership test, then they can't attack. They can't do anything. And any attack made on that character is automatically hits. There's innocence lost. These deceptive creatures look so inoffensive and vulnerable that naive enemies lower their defense. So they can basically just means that the character can attack first no matter what. Then transfix: the vampire is so beautiful that a mere mortal's will to fight immediately disappears before her. Now this is a step down from domination. So rather than the character being able to get automatically hit, it just can't attack. And then beguile is: what brute would dare to attack such a vulnerable lady? And basically it cannot attack just the vampire. It can attack everyone else, just not the vampire. So the way this worked in tabletop was, if you had seduction, domination, transfix, and beguile, all 4 of those, they would work out in order of well, you couldn't have all 4, but still, my point is they would work out in order of point cost. So seduction is the most expensive, and beguile is the least expensive. So the way it worked in tabletop was, you would move down. Okay, if they failed their seduction test, they moved to domination, then they moved to transfix, and then moved to beguile. But if they succeeded on seduction and someone else was in base contact with the vampire, you could do domination. So basically, the Lamian vampire could control combat in such a way that it didn't matter that she didn't have the highest weapon skill. It didn't matter that she wasn't the most defensive character in the game. She could dominate and control the combat to suit her needs. That is exactly the crux of the lore of the Lamian vampires. They kind of control society. They control their immediate court in the way that best suits their means. It's all in kind of the greater arc towards Neferata, and making it so that Neferata's grand goal is seen. There is a time when things kind of got off the rails. There is a Katarine, the vampire czar of Kislev, basically led a rebellious faction of Lamian vampires against Neferata. And Neferata kind of said, nay, 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 that shan't happen. And they got into a huge civil war, and she basically dealt with that and killed her off. And moreover, she didn't kill her off. She convinced everyone around her, all the Kislevites and everything like that, that she was, a spawn of chaos, and had her basically killed. So you kind of see that that's how the Lamians function, is they control societies that they interact with. Ashran creates Morkane, this great grand empire after Lamia, and Neferata gets pissed and is like, I'm not going to have that, and controls tribesmen to attack, and actually manipulates orcs to attack. So you have these instances in history where Neferata directly uses her connection and her control over humanity to better serve her purposes. And we see that so many times through the Lamian bloodline kind of history. Some other kind of like Lamian special characters, I guess you could say. There's Ulrika, who is a vampire of the Silver Pinnacle as well. I don't know if I mentioned that, right? Did I mention that Neferata takes over the dwarf hold of the Silver Pinnacle, and it becomes like the court of the Night Queen, and everyone's afraid to go there, and only like brave people go and journey there, and when they do, they're like, oh, this isn't too bad. But then they just get like, they come home with a Lamian vampire wife who infiltrates their court. I don't know if I said it, but that's what happens. But there's Ulrika, who is another Kislev vampire who goes to the Silver Pinnacle, but eventually kind of rebels against Neferata and the Lamian vampires, and kind of, she doesn't join Kislev society 100%, but she kind of guards Kislev society, kind of harrying through the countryside, guarding against chaos, but knows she can't fully rejoin things, and she kind of has the banner of her family on her, she always kind of carries it on her steed when she's traveling around doing these good deeds, to kind of know that, hey, I might be dead, but I'm still Kislev in the end. So it's kind of a cool kind of nod. There's also Genevieve, who is she's a pretty popular vampire in the grander scheme of the lore. She's the vampire that helps kill Drakenfels, who is a pretty terrifying old Tom Bombadil of the Warhammer lore, if you want to think of it that way. But he's been retconned through so much crap, he just barely exists in the lore now. But hopefully you guys got a lot of information here on Lamia, and you have a good idea of how their vampire bloodline works. And as we go through the other bloodlines, we'll probably talk about Shigoi next, because he plays so heavily a hand in the fall of Lamia, as well as the kind of the growth of the vampire bloodlines after that. But we'll talk about each one of these vampire bloodlines. We'll talk about each one of the Primarch, the progenitor of those bloodlines, and how they've kind of progressed through life, because the story of these bloodlines is linked heavily to the story of their master vampire, of their chief bloodline kind of holder. We'll have one video that talks about the two kind of forsaken or lost bloodlines, as they're called. And these guys actually, they only have scant mentions in the lore, so that video won't be anything kind of crazy cool or in depth. There's no awesome bloodline abilities I can go into, but they've been fleshed out a little bit more here and there in the past. But we'll have plenty to go over here in the next coming days, guys. We'll have one of these pumped out a day, starting with Lamia today, Shigoi tomorrow probably, followed by probably with Sauron. I'll save Abhorash for second to last, and Von Karstein as last before we talk about our lost bloodlines. But thanks so much for watching here today, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed this little video on the vampire bloodlines. If you want to know more about something in specific about this, please by all means go ahead and let me know below in the comment section. There's plenty of other information I'm skirting over. I am deliberately not talking about the fall of Lamia because it is such a wide sweeping event that I'd rather just touch on it when I talk about Neferata herself. But as always, guys, thanks so much for watching here today. Don't forget to check out my Patreon. I will be in BlizzCon here this whole end of this week, so if I don't respond on Thursday through to Sunday, I'm sorry, but I'll get around to you, I promise. And as always, guys, have a good one, and take care.